The monthly special that I am mostly excited about is our conservation spotlight episode. So every month I'm going to be joined with Justin Spring from the Pope and Young Club, and we're going to talk about some conservation issues. What's going on in the world of conservation? What can you do at this moment to step in and help on certain battles? But also just what's going on in the world of Pope and Young. So for those of you on both sides of things, if you're coming from the Pope and Young world, we have decided to do away with the Pope and Young podcast, and we're going to do one episode here dedicated to what's going on in the world of conservation, what's going on in the world of Pope and Young. This is going to be the best place to come. We're going to have all of the new world record holders on as world records are broken to come and share the story of that hunt, to share how it went, about that new world record. We're going to share, again, conservation issues that we need your support on, what's going on in the world of conservation, what's going on in the world of Pope and Young. It's going to be a fun episode. Justin Spring is a brilliant conservation-minded guy. I love talking about conservation issues with Justin because he makes me think about them in a way that I would not have without him bringing it up. So, guys, this is going to be the best place each month to get all of your conservation news. I would highly encourage you to subscribe to the Typical Sportsman podcast and keep an eye out every month for the Conservation Spotlight episode. It's always going to be a fun one, I promise you. Spoiler alert, next month we're going to dive into, is predator hunting good or is it bad? Is it actually benefiting the herds of deer or elk or moose, whatever it might be? Or is it actually hurting those herds? It's going to be a really, really informative episode. Guys, this episode, we cover a whole lot. We cover a black bear study in Kentucky, the benefits of that, even if you don't live in Kentucky, even if you're not a bear hunter, the benefits of that for us as sportsmen and outdoorsmen. We're going to cover the Fort Peck bison herd being introduced to the record books. Why is a bison herd introduced to the record books, and why are other bison herds not accepted in the record books? We talk about all of that. We talk about what makes a conservation model acceptable for Pope and Young or Boone and Crockett. We talk about all the differences in Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett, but we also talk about all the similarities, how much we work together, what we work together on, the purposes of each, and why our differences drive our purposes. It's a really, really informative episode. And then we dive into the nitty-gritty of crossbows. There was a recent crossbow ban in Arizona. And so we dive into that. We dive into what types of things make those decisions. We talk about what types of things should be considered in making those decisions. And then we talk about the acceptance of lighted sights into the Pope and Young record book. Again, not just that Pope and Young has accepted lighted sights, but why did we make that decision? What all went into making that decision? Why are lighted sights now accepted? Why weren't they before? We talk about all that and more. It is a super fun episode. Guys, as always, this episode is brought to you by my good friends over at 2O Gear. 2O is the highest quality Western gear at the best price ever. I have pushed the 2O gear in about every way possible. It's been on a spring bear hunt, and it's been on a nitty-gritty elk hunt. And in that elk hunt, I can say I threw just about every scenario at the 2O gear that you can throw at it. Hot, cold, rain, busting through brush, hiking a lot of miles, and it performed in every way. Also, their pattern is just about probably my favorite pattern ever. So guys, go check out 2O Gear for some incredible Western gear at an unbeatable price. But guys, let's jump in with Justin Spring for our Conservation Spotlight episode of the month.
For the true sportsman, it's more than a pastime. It's a way of life. Embrace the lifestyle of hunting, fishing, and the thrill of the wild. Live the life. Be typical.
All right. Welcome to our Conservation Spotlight episode. So just to fill everybody in, if you listen to episode 1 of the Typical Sportsman podcast, I shared with you kind of what we were going to do here. And that's kind of share all of the Pope and Young news. Once a month, you can come right here to hear everything that's going on in the world of conservation, of Pope and Young. And we're just going to give you an update. So Pope and Young decided to do away with their podcast. So if you're coming over from the Pope and Young podcast, here's a little bit of reason as to why. We've decided to do away with our own podcast and just share once a month with you everything that's going on in the world of Pope and Young. So this will be a place to come once a month to hear all the new world records that were broken, updates on what's going on in the world of conservation as far as bow hunting and Pope and Young go. And so each month I'm going to be joined by Justin Spring and or Tim Rzuski maybe, or Blake McFall, as well as new world record holders. As those are broken, we'll have them on here to share the stories and tell of the hunt. So I've got Mr. Justin Spring on. We're going to kind of talk about everything that Pope and Young has been up to. We want to share with you the conservation projects we've been working on. We want to share with you the exciting news of our convention and everything that we've got going on there. We ask that you would join us. We have a lot of great companies join us, which we'll get to. But we're also going to talk about a couple issues that have been brought up just recently. There was a crossbow ban in Arizona we're going to dive into. And then Pope and Young actually introduced the exception of lighted sights into the record books that we're going to touch on. But first, let's jump into the conservation projects that we have been working on. Justin, do you want to share a little bit about the bear research project that we got to be a part of?
Yeah, so this was a project in Kentucky. They had a new bear season added. It was kind of in response to some crop damage that they were seeing, and they didn't have any data to back whether or not those bears creating the damage were traveling to that location. If they were resident bears, they really wanted to know, are these bears coming from all over? And that would help them dictate, a harvest level for that archery season on what would be sustainable. So we worked with them. We bought the radio collars and the airtime that they needed to get that study done. And they were putting those out this fall, and it's all cruising along. I've not seen any results yet, but that data is being collected.
And so I do want to touch on, a lot of people ask, about auctions. And first off, I think auction tags and governor tags, I think that needs to be a whole episode in and of itself, because there's a lot of misconception. A lot of people think that the price of a governor's tag drives the price of regular tags, which is absurd. But we're going to talk about that in depth on another episode. But that is the benefit of auctions. That's the benefit of the events that Pope and Young does. That bear research study was fully funded by two events, our Texas Bowhunter Bash and our Ogden Bowhunter Bash. So if you came to one of those events, we thank you so much for your support. The funds for this study were raised fully and completely at those events. So I want to say, attend your events, attend your conservation events, not just Pope and Young events, but Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. All of those local events are raising money for conservation. So go to those. But from the silent auctions and the live auctions and the raffle tickets, all of those funds are being used to further our rights as hunters. And this is a perfect example of that. We, as Pope and Young, all of the funds for that bear research study were raised at those two events. So find an event. We have an event coming up in January 4th in College Station, Bryan, at the Legion's Event Center there in Bryan. Going to be a fun event. This last year event in Texas sold out. It was a stellar event. We have lots of cool auction items. We got lots of great hunts. We've got several bows to auction off. We've got several raffles to do and fun things going on during the day there at Live Oak Archery in College Station, Bryan. So if you're in the area, join us for that event. It's going to be a great event. And that's where these types of funds are raised. So head over to pope-young.org and right on the banner is that Texas event. If you're in the area, make sure and join us. It's going to be a blast. Another thing that has went on is the Fort Peck. Now, there was a lot of questions about this that I got after Pope and Young had announced the introduction of Fort Peck bison. Got a lot of questions as to why. Got a lot of questions as to what makes a herd eligible to be in the record books. So first off, dive into the introduction of Fort Peck, how all that works, and then we'll dive into kind of what qualifies a herd, why we introduce a herd like that.
So on the Fort Peck, they've done a great job with their wildlife program and bringing bison back to location. They actually work in conjunction with Montana. They have a holding facility there to ensure brucellosis is not a transmission issue, which we can get into that a little further. That's one of the biggest problems with bison is the presence of brucellosis in some of them and the ramifications that may have on a state's cattle production. But basically, in essence, they've got a free-ranging wild herd that is being managed by the tribal, managing authority, and population is being controlled through hunting. It's actually one that the average hunter could put in and draw a tag to go hunt the Fort Peck herd if you were so inclined. And so it's a managed free-ranging big game herd, which is what the records program for both Boone and Crockett and Pope and Young is looking to recognize. Just because it's on a tribal ground doesn't make it any less valuable for the data set for what's on the landscape of North America. And so our records chairman had talked to someone on the part of the tribal management. He was requested by a hunter that had gone there and said, "Hey, I'm pretty sure this would qualify." And so he talked with the manager. He made sure that it wasn't, fair chase was being met in all cases. There was nothing, questionable about any of the operations. And then that was taken to our records committee. That records committee recommendation went to the board, and the board passed that inclusion unanimously.
So, and this might be just because it's accepted into Pope and Young, does that automatically mean it's accepted into Boone and Crockett? And the reason that question comes up is because of the way you stated that. Because what a lot of people don't understand about Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett, we work together very closely on a lot of issues. We are not competing organizations. We are not, it's not one side versus the other. We work very closely with Boone and Crockett. So walk me through kind of how that works as far as the acceptance of a tribe into one and not in the other, or if they are accepted into both.
So with the organizations, Pope and Young in 1961 got permission to utilize BNC's records program. So they still do oversee how the scoring takes place. That being said, when we got our permission, there is some slight differences in herds and areas that we accept because of the varying mission statements. Pope and Young is for, preservation, promotion, and protection of bow hunting. Boone and Crockett is, overall wildlife management and looking at the herd numbers and the species of North America. And so there are some very few situations where a particular herd or a particular rule may not apply to both. Most commonly, once the BNC Records Committee makes a decision, or Pope and Young, we're talking to one another when this happens. We probably would not do something if it went in the exact opposite of a strong feeling that the other organization had. But they are two separate groups. There's two separate record committees. There's two separate board of directors. Pope and Young, major changes like this have to go to the entire membership for a vote, which is a little bit different than Boone and Crockett. So they are two separate organizations. But as Dylan said, we work very closely. There's 3 Pope and Young members on the Boone and Crockett's Records Committee. There's Boone and Crockett representation on the Pope and Young Records Committee. It's not a hostile relationship in any way. So we're always trying to work closely together and make sure we're working in concert for the mission of both organizations.
So, and that's something too. One of the biggest misconceptions about Pope and Young is that we only care about the biggest and best. We're just a record book that cares about, new world records and that top, percentile, whatever. Pope and Young minimums are a lot lower than Boone and Crockett's. Now, I would say for 2 reasons. Like Justin said, our mission is completely different. Boone and Crockett wants to figure out where in the world are the biggest animals coming from. And that's why it doesn't matter how they were harvested. You can find a deadhead and put it in Boone and Crockett. You could hit them with a car and put them in Boone and Crockett. Because again, it's just about locating those animals and figuring out where they were. Pope and Young just wants to be able to show data of mature animals being taken with archery equipment. So for instance, a minimum whitetail for Pope and Young is 125, minimum for Boone and Crockett's 165. Again, that's a big difference. One of which archery equipment is just harder to use. It's harder to kill bigger animals with archery equipment, but they also just serve two completely different purposes. Again, we work in conjunction and we help one another. Our measuring courses are done in conjunction with one another. Our books are in our measuring manuals are in conjunction with one another, but we do serve two completely different purposes. So in the case of this Fort Peck herd being introduced, was that recommendation from Pope and Young taken, and is Boone and Crockett now accepting them as well?
That was discussed at Boone and Crockett's most recent meeting, and I'm not sure where they're at on that release. But yes, as soon as we accepted it, it was in front of Boone and Crockett.
Okay.
There is a release that just came out at the most recent meeting that Boone and Crockett had. They accepted javelina as a new category, and so now that's gone to our records committee, and they're working with Boone and Crockett to see if that's something that we'll bring to our committee and eventually our board and membership to vote on as well. And so, yeah, it's there's really nothing secret going on behind the scenes on either organization. It's just some move quicker on one topic and some on the other. And, if we decide to not do javelina, we will come out with a reason why, while we recognize Boone and Crockett's done this, from an archery perspective, this is why this data set would not be useful for our mission, or hey, we agree with them, this is going to be a great addition, and we'll see where that lands.
Okay, so walk me through, why is it taking so long for javelina to be in the books? And B, why would Boone and Crockett and why wouldn't Pope and Young? Why was the reasoning for Boone and Crockett to add it? So in the same breath that I say, it took so long, why are we adding it?
So the biggest reason they weren't historically added was there's locations that they were not managed. And for Boone and Crockett, that's one of the stipulations that it has to be a managed big game animal. When the third of the three states that they're in came on board and put in a limit and started managing for them, all of a sudden, a proposal was brought to Boone and Crockett, which will also be given to Pope and Young, that said, across this species range, it is managed as a big game animal. The records program for Boone and Crockett is to monitor wildlife management successes and failures. And so a species being managed in North America as a big native big game species, clearly, the records committee felt this was the appropriate time to add that category. At this point, I have not heard any conversations from our records committee. I know that, historically, javelinas weren't highly looked upon by some folks, and I would say that's probably why we haven't had categories in both organizations up to this point. But that's a conservation success. This is the elevation of a native North American species. It's very interesting, to a level where we're telling hunters, like, no, this is on the same playing field as any of your other species that we're recognizing. And it's kind of our bad for taking this long to kind of recognize that. And it took some efforts from the states to come to the committees and say, hey, we'd like this considered, and here's a proposal on how to move forward.
Okay, so hear me out on this. And I don't really know where the question is at in this, but seems to me, and I've hunted javelinas probably 4 or 5 times, seems to me every javelina is about the same size. Like there's never like a herd of javelina. You're like, holy crap, that's a giant, or that's tiny. Sometimes there's bigger ones and smaller ones, but again, it seems to me they're all in that same size range. Like there's no massive differences where, with, elk and whitetail and sheep and all those other things, there could be a massive variety. So what purpose would that serve in a record book?
So, just because it's not, easily apparent, most hunting of javelinas is kind of secondary. Folks aren't traveling. They're not going out and looking for that trophy javelina. It's, maybe there is more differences, and as people, as more interest is brought onto the species, perhaps there's certain traits of an older animal that's going to have a larger skull, which is how BNC decided to measure them, that might come forward. This is getting that data. Maybe we start to see wow, indeed, half of the entries that the organizations are seeing are females. Maybe there's not that, size difference that we that we would see in, say, an ungulate population or something. And so, part of this, we don't really have the answer. I mean, is it going to be challenging? Yeah, but I also, I can tell you, like, I've killed nearly a 7-foot bear in Montana that skull was nowhere near as big as I thought. And I've seen bears killed in the Southeast that were, half the body size of the big one I killed in Montana, and the skull was 3 inches bigger, And so as the data comes in, as the seasons progress, as we start to see this, some of these questions will be answered. Do I look for broken off tusks? Is that the sign of an old animal? Is there some attribute that I need to be looking for that might equate to a larger skull?
Very cool. And that's interesting. Now, and I don't want to get too far off topic, but I do have a question for you because you said the male female thing there with javelinas. A friend of mine killed a buck fully in velvet in November, but it had no nuts. How is that handled by a record book? How is that handled by Pope and Young and or Boone and Crockett? Because it had antlers and big antlers. It was probably 140, but how is that handled? Because it's not actually a male representation of the species, but it has antlers.
So this one for Pope and Young, it's an archery taken animal. We're not as much looking at, the overall species health. It's a great accomplishment as a bow hunter to take that type of animal. They accept velvet, so a stag in that case would be accepted by Pope and Young. Boone and Crockett says anything like that that has a testosterone imbalance. Basically, it's not developing those antlers in the same pattern as your normal male animal would be. Antler production is started and stopped by hormones. And if the testicles are undersized, non-existent, undescended, a pseudo-hermaphroditic animal, that testosterone production is inhibited, or there's not the spikes that cause it to start and stop. So for Boone and Crockett, a animal such as that would be considered a stag trophy. And while it's a great one to shoot, there's nothing to say don't shoot it, because obviously it probably can't reproduce. From a data collection standpoint, it's not a representative sample of the population, so therefore they do not include it at all in their records.
Now, as far as Pope and Young goes, does that not still show the antler health of the species? Because even a doe carries genetics for antlers. If a buck is born, it's getting 50% of the antler genes from mom, 50% from dad. So does that animal still not show antler health for the overall herd?
So the antlers, the reason that they work as a potential indicator of herd health is as a secondary sexual characteristic, right? The antlers do not grow until the animal's basic need has been met. When you're looking at a characteristic that is basically being grown to attract mates, to fight off other ones, it's not the overall inches, if that makes sense. It's not like, that there is this much resources to grow these antlers on an animal that, maybe isn't producing any reproductive, serving any reproductive function. And so just saying, a rack of 140 isn't, that alone doesn't say, okay, that's an indicator of herd health. It's not being produced in the same situation as, a buck that's meeting its needs, growing its antlers at the same time. It's in sexual competition that you see breaks and whatnot, where, better antler development is going to show stronger in the scoring system. So it's just not really a, apples to apples comparison to include a doe like that in what you're trying to do and looking at the trends in, antler development done by the organizations.
Gotcha. So hear me out. If that's how it works for a doe to grow antlers like that, for a stag to grow antlers like that. So does that mean if you see a stag with, 140 inches of antler, does that mean that your area has really good nutrients because that doe is meeting all of her needs and then growing good antlers?
So not necessarily with any type of stag, depending on the time that castration takes place or what the damage is or the underdevelopment. You could have a deer that starts growing antlers, say at age 2, and never has that secondary testosterone bump. So that rack, that 140-inch antlers, they may never come out of velvet. They may grow for 4 years continuously and never shed, because all the shedding and all that comes from that testosterone increase, and then the secondary increase that starts the new growth, which causes the previous ones to shed. And so looking at that without having that attribute developed in that same time frame with those same hormonal increases, it's just that you can't really say anything. You could if an animal gets castrated, they might lose their antlers and never grow back. Say they've already got a hard horn, they've already hardened up for the year, and they get castrated during the rut or something. Well, if they lose those testicles, they're never going to get that hormone. So they may look like a doe the rest of their life, even though they're going to have those pedicles. And so it doesn't really translate. It's kind of a genetic oddity. And most of what the horned does are pseudo-hermaphroditic, means they have testes that are just undescended. So basically they have both sexual organs, allowing that testosterone production to start and potentially stop antler growth as well. Some are very typical and are probably having that same testosterone, cycle as your average buck would.
Interesting. And this is why you listen to Sir Justin Spring when he speaks, because he's always, I honestly, we had no intention of talking about stags and antler growth, but I'm glad we did. Back to the Fort Peck, back to the bison herd. So there are a lot of Indian reservations where bison herds or other animals are not accepted into the books. What causes those herds to not be accepted?
There needs to be a developed management plan to where they're not being raised as cattle. And that, bison are very different than a lot of other wildlife. They're an animal that can be, raised for meat. That's why you can buy bison burger in the store. Those are farmed like a cow would be. I mean, a little bit bigger fence. But they need to be managed as a free-ranging big game herd, to be considered fair chase. If we're rounding them up a couple times a year, inoculating them, doing artificial insemination or anything, that's not a truly big game herd. And so we don't know all the different wildlife programs out there by the Native American tribes that are doing this. But, this Fort Peck is one, and we've already heard of another, 2 after that have a very similar situation on, trying to bring the bison back to tribal lands, which realistically, it's honestly the country's best hope for the restoration of bison if we ever hope to get anywhere near what those numbers were historically. Bison they're a unique animal. They're a big herd animal. We drove them nearly to extinction out of the back of a train. I mean, they're not like a deer or elk. They're a different critter. And so you need these big swaths of land, undeveloped land, preferably away from freeways. I mean, nobody wants to run into a bison, doing 80 at, 1:30 in the morning. And a lot of these tribal areas have some wonderful habitat and some big open expanses that are probably some of our best options to get more bison on the landscape. So we really encourage the tribes, that are interested in doing this to, manage them as a free-ranging herd, try to bring them back, and we'd love to recognize them for their efforts, for the good of the entire, country, not just their particular area. But this is a wildlife species that, maybe they'll come back onto, other lands and expand.
And that's a perfect example as to the statement that we hear a lot in the conservation world. And I heard it about the Kentucky bears. Well, I don't hunt bears in Kentucky. Okay. But by increasing the herd in Kentucky and by helping that herd, we very well could increase the herd in Arkansas or Missouri or Oklahoma or wherever. It's an overall, and that's why it's called the North American model of wildlife, not the Kentucky model. Because if we as a community will step in and help the Fort Peck bison range, man, my grandkids could very well be hunting free range bison. I mean, and that herd could be restored. So yeah, we do all need to work together. as a hunting community, because I want to see what's good for the North American model of wildlife conservation, not just the Kansas whitetail or the Arkansas ducks or whatever. I want to see an entire country that is raising up a healthy herd of big game animals. So
to expand on your Kentucky example, like, I kind of explained, they had a crop depredation issue that they increased harvest to try to address. Now, what if that's pulling bears from 5 counties, right? What if all of a sudden those bears from 5 counties are all congregated, say they're easily huntable. At that time when they're on that food source, you could really knock the crap out of them. Well, that study is going to tell them, hey, if we're in a situation where we have this really high quality food item that's bringing these bears from this far, potentially they have the ability to reduce that overpopulation. So while you may never hunt bears in Kentucky, say you live in a state that does have a bear season with a crop damage issue, they've now got that data that they can say, like, hey, we got to be careful and not overshoot these, or we're going to hurt the whole population because of this work done in Kentucky. This isn't, is there regional variations in wildlife? Certainly, but it's all going to the greater wildlife knowledge. And, any conservation group, oh, they didn't put money in my state. Well, they didn't, but maybe your state's riding the coattails, all that research they did fund in, the Dakotas or Mississippi or wherever it may be.
Right. Well, that's a really good example. And that's why, again, I just want to go back to support all of the conservation efforts for all different species. I don't care if you don't duck hunt at all. Go to a Ducks Unlimited banquet and support those. I don't care if you pheasant hunt. Go to a Pheasants Forever chapter meeting and support that conservation effort. National Wild Turkey Federation, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, all of those. Go and support all of those, because, man, I might not ever, bear hunt in Kentucky, but I can promise you that when I as a whitetail hunter in Kansas need support, I hope the Kentucky bear hunters step in and support me. So in their time of need, I want to step in and support them as well. And that's why, again, Justin kind of alluded to this as well. Pope and Young does have a membership model. And you don't have to have ever killed a Pope and Young quality animal. You don't have to have anything in the books. You don't ever have to enter anything in the books. If you're a bow hunter, you should belong with Pope and Young. Reason is, when we go forward for legislation, when we step in to help Kentucky, it means a whole lot more to say, hey, we represent 1.2 million bow hunters than it does to say we represent 1,000 bow hunters. So if you're a bow hunter, you should belong to Pope and Young. If you're a duck hunter, you should belong to Ducks Unlimited. If you're a pheasant hunter, you should belong to Pheasants Forever. All of the above. Because again, when we go forward to lend our voice or to lend our hand, it means a whole lot more to say, hey, we represent, 1.2 million bow hunters. So I would highly encourage you to join Pope and Young as a member if you're a bow hunter. And I would almost guess if you're listening to this, you're a bow hunter. So join Pope and Young today. Now, on to the convention. Pope and Young has a biannual convention, and it's coming up in April of 2025. And we have plans to do some things that we've never done before. We have some plans to change some things. It's going to be a super fun convention. Walk us through some of the convention items that you want to highlight.
Man, let's start with our Camp Chef cook-off on Wednesday, Dylan. I'm stoked on that. Like, this is, wild game's a tremendous resource. There's some folks out there doing some awesome job cooking it, and so we're starting our convention off with basically a cooking contest that you can sign up and be a team. You get some cool Camp Chef items with it. If you're not feeling your skills are strong, you can still come. You come to our reception that night. We're asking all the participating teams to make samples for those that choose to try it, to vote for crowd favorite. I mean, I think it's going to be a great event. And if you think you got a great recipe or a great wild game cooking set, man, we'd encourage you to join. We want to have as many people there as possible, and have it be a great, competition that maybe, starting off every 2 years, maybe it's popular enough we can do it every year.
And the price of admission
gets
you gets you that exact value back almost in a Camp Chef cooking system. So it's worth it to enter. If you say, man, I got a decent recipe, it's worth it to enter because the prize for entry is worth the entry fee. So any team it's teams of up to 3, correct?
Yeah, I think 3 or 5. I can't remember what we said. Each team, the team will get 1 Camp Chef grill. I think we said up to 5 people on a team. The idea being like maybe your whole family wants to come cook. I'll have to double check that, but it's not. We'll have we're hoping to have a couple celebrity judges on there that really know the food game, and so it will be a legit competition. But at the same time, this is supposed to be family fun. This is, do it together, do it, maybe win a cool prize package. But at the same time, nobody should be intimidated, especially early on, man. Let's just make this a fun competition that people look forward to. And for the next 2 years, you're planning like, hey, what do I need to set aside in the freezer so I have enough for the judges and all the people to attend down there, wherever our next convention may be. I can't let that out yet. So.
Yeah, and one of our celebrity judges is our Cook Wild chef, Mr. Mike Castaneda. So if you need some inspiration, go back and listen to all the Cook Wild episodes. Find you something good to cook. I promise you, if you come to Mike and say, "Well, I used your recipe off Cook Wild," that's going to carry some weight. He's going to have to consider that. So go back and listen to all those. Find you some good recipes. And part of the reason we brought Mike in is because Mike is a recognized chef from Food Network, as one of the top 10 chefs in America. So Mike understands food outside of wild game. And so we want him to judge, on presentation and I'm not a cook, but on all the weird stuff that cooks think about. I just think does it taste good and make me full. But so he's going to take that to a whole new level on the judging. So guys, again, enter to win that. It's going to be a fun event, even if you're not cooking, to come hang out at. It's in a beautiful area, Glendale, Arizona. Going to be gorgeous in April. We have a lot of great companies showing up. A lot of big outfitters. If you're looking to book a hunt, a lot of great outfitters, a lot of great vendors from our partners. There's going to be a lot of our vendors run some really good show specials at Pope and Young to book hunts and to buy products. So come check out all the vendors. We're not far enough in this yet to name a whole lot of vendors, but we always have a turnout of a good, 110 vendors. And they're always just top-notch guys. So come hang out and see our vendors. We've got incredible auctions. Do you want to walk through some of the highlighted auction items? We got some big auction items.
Yeah, no, we've got a couple, Dylan kind of touched on a couple governor's tags earlier and some of the issues with that. We're actually, at this point kind of teed up to sell a couple of those for another organization that all that money will be 100% returned to the state that those are for. We've got a hunt for Alaska Yukon moose that would your time of this hunt would most likely put you there in the velvet. My wife and I did that hunt a few years back. We were hunting with rifles, not bows, and both those bulls we killed with rifles would have been Pope and Young world records. So kind of kicking myself, I left my bow home, but we got a freezer full of meat. So no, those are going to be awesome. A couple of the other things too that I want to highlight, Dylan. I mean, we've got that ladies luncheon that we're doing on Friday for the first time. Yep. We've got a couple groups coming in to if you want to bring the kids along with you, some wildlife oriented youth activities, some great activities basically for the whole family. The Friday night, if you're a hunter 17 or younger that has taken a qualifying Pope Young animal, it's accepted in this particular biennium that we're closing up. We're going to invite you down and recognize you on stage for your accomplishment on Friday night. And then, of course, Saturday night, the big game awards, that's the biggest of the biggest being taken with, archery equipment today, which is always exciting. But even if you're not, not in that caliber, or, I'm never going to see something of that size, it doesn't matter. You're still welcome. There's still stuff for you to do there. There's still stuff for the family. This is a gathering of bow hunters. One night we talk about the big critters, but the rest of the time we're preserving, promoting, and protecting the sport we all love.
One of my favorite parts about convention, it is a gathering of bow hunters, and we have some of the biggest names in bow hunting. And when you go to some shows, it's, those guys are closed off. They have a meet and greet time. You got to wait in line to shake a hand and get an autograph. I remember the first convention I walked into for Pope and Young. I sit down at a table with Chuck Adams and Tom Miranda, Tom Nelson. I got to have dinner one night with Remy Warren, got to have dinner one night with Michael Waddell. These guys are just walking around convention, and it's a really just fun time. I mean, it's a good time to just share stories and hang out. And here's what I learned. I went in with that stigma of like, well, crap, I don't kill big animals. Like I'm not, this isn't for me, like I shouldn't be here almost, you almost go in with that feeling. And I remember it was Jack Frost. My first convention, I'm sitting there talking with Jack Frost. And he's asking me, so what have you killed this year? Like, how's your season been? And he genuinely cares to hear about my animals. Like, it's not just, oh, look how cool I am. Look how great I am. Look how, I'm such a big, bad bow hunter. They genuinely care about, well, how's your season been? Show me pictures. Like, let me look at trail camera pictures. What'd you kill? Like, it's just such a fun time of like-minded, conservation-driven bow hunters. And it's a place where you get to just come and meet some of the coolest people. I believe we have teed up already a live question and answer with Remy Warren, which is always one of my favorite seminars to jump in on. Being that we're so busy, I don't have time to sit in on a lot of seminars. But the live question and answer with Remy is always an awesome, awesome seminar because they live stream it. So there's a lot of questions coming in from everywhere. It's a really cool seminar. We've got great seminars from some of the greatest bow hunters the world has ever known. Alan Bolin always does a great job of doing a seminar. We've got Bob Amin. We've got Frank Noska. A ton of seminars. It's a great place to grow as a bow hunter. We're also doing a tree stand safety seminar with lots of great prizes at that. It's going to be a fun convention. So I would encourage you, Glendale, Arizona, April 9th through the 12th, make plans to be there, guys. Even if you stop in for a day, it's worth it just to stop in for the day and see the vendors, get the show specials, hit some seminars, meet some of your favorite bow hunters. It is a awesome convention. We've got some great partners that are going to be there, and you're going to want to try to make it if you can.
Dylan, you should probably hit on the field judging world championships that we'll be doing.
Yeah, I suck at that.
What's that?
I suck at field judging. Man, they told me I was wrong. But listen, last time I entered on every single one of them, I just put more than 12. So I was right on every trophy. Like, I don't know how they told me I didn't win because I was right 100% of the time.
No, this is a pretty cool deal. We've done it at our other events. You might see it at, anywhere Pope and Young's out, we're gonna try to do this field judging world championship. Basically, you get 4 animals. You get a set amount of time through optics from Kawa to look at each of them. The winner at the individual event takes home one of the optics that we use. So you could win a spotter. Before I was on board, I won a nice pair of 12 power binos. I mean, I still use those quite a bit. If you win the event, you get a spotter, and then you qualifies you for this national championship that will be happening during our convention in Glendale, which, we will crown the world champion field judger that night, amongst all those areas and all the areas of the company or the country represented from the events that we've done it at.
So that will be at the Texas event that we talked about earlier. So if you're listening, you can come enter in Texas. If you win in Texas, you're automatically in at the convention. It is really cool. I am really bad at it, but it is really cool. It's a whole lot of fun. It's incredible to watch people and hear their thought process. Like, you hear guys behind the spotter and they're saying like, all right, he's good on his G2s, but he's got that little kicker. That's going to be -3 inches. And then they write a number down and it's like an eighth of an inch off. And you're like, how in the crap did you do that? You've also got guys like myself that write down a number for a sheep, and then you realize, oh, the number I wrote down would have been, the world record 3 times over. So I don't know. Anyways, it is a lot of fun. The field judging championship is a good time. Lots of great prizes. Again, our friends over at COA have stepped up and helped with that to give you some cool prizes for winning. So it's worth it. Come compete in the Nerf bow challenge. That's more of my speed. Shoot a Nerf bow into a bucket, win a brand new bow. It's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun at convention. There is no shortage of a good time. And I will say, like Justin mentioned, wives, tag along. My wife went 1 year with me. We've got great things for the women throughout the day. We've actually got a spa package. So you can sit and talk bow hunting with the boys. She can go to the spa. We've got a 3D shoot. We've got the barbecue. It's a fun family event. So everybody make plans to join us. It's going to be a good time.
Dylan, you might have just shot yourself in the foot the next time you come to visit on Becca Cooking by insinuating she might want to go to the spa instead of talk bow hunting.
Sorry, Becca. I love you. I'm sorry. You're sweet. Yeah, Becca is definitely a bad to the bone bow hunter who could hold her own with anyone. So I would definitely not ever insinuate that. However, she might want to get away from you for a few hours and just get off site.
That.
So,
that makes sense.
You brought up something yesterday that I wasn't even aware of, but B, I definitely want to talk about. There was a recent crossbow ban. Why would a state choose to ban crossbows? And should all states choose to ban crossbows?
So this was an interesting discussion. It took place in Arizona. One of our members was involved in the commission, and it wasn't a ban on crossbows. It was not allowing them during their archery seasons. There's a group that we just presented to in Idaho, which is called the HAT Committee, Hunting and Technology, and all of their presentations and documentation is on the Idaho Fish and Game website, looking at technology and hunting and how we navigate it going forward. When it comes to crossbows, what I presented to Idaho and what we're looking at there, the success rate when a crossbow is allowed during a conventional archery season is higher than that of your traditional vertical bow. Now, in some cases, that doesn't mean crossbows are bad across the board. There are places, especially in the East, where we cannot kill enough deer. First and foremost, we want to make sure we have healthy wildlife populations. So there may be situations where increased technology actually is needed to maintain a herd. That doesn't mean that what's good on one side of the country is good on the other. We wait a lot of years for tags out west. I remember when I was, growing up, Oregon, you could hunt the entire state with a bow tag. Success was so low with the technology we had. I got to hunt elk, every day for a month if I could, sneak out of school and not get in trouble. And it wasn't a problem. Well, as success rates rise, then all of a sudden the eastern part of the state, you had to start drawing, and then it got harder to draw, and so we're not coming out saying that, the crossbow is the devil and there's no place for it. And, hunters that maybe can't draw a bow, new hunters that haven't gotten to the field, there's a place for it. But the fact is it will increase the harvest rate, which if combined with other traditional archery seasons and whatnot, may not be compatible at a state level. And so what happened in Arizona, how long do people wait for those Arizona tags? You start killing twice as many elk on the tags you're given. Well, that means the rest of us have to wait twice as long to even have an opportunity. And so that's what this crossbow debate is about. It's not that technology's bad. It's not that they don't have a place. It's that if we increase our successfulness through the use of technology, and maybe not just crossbows, perhaps certain sites, certain scouting technologies, drones, whatever it may be, anything that makes it easier to take an animal is going in the long run increase success and reduce opportunity. And at the end of the day, that's what sells this technology. It makes you a better hunter, and that's why you're buying it. And so the discussion that Pope and Young's in, and the reason you should support us, is that we're having those bold conversations. We're working with these companies that, maybe they have a great new technology that has a wonderful use, but at the same time could be abused. And we're just trying to talk through like, hey, how do we navigate this technology, and asking hunters, do you want to go hunting every year for 10 years and kill an elk 1 out of 10 years? Or do you want to sit on the sideline for 9 years, get one elk tag, hunt 1 year, and be guaranteed to kill? For me personally, I'd rather hunt for 10 years than sit out that whole time. And so this is, in Arizona, what they chose to do makes sense. Would that make sense in a state that can't kill enough deer? I'd argue no. It's awful hard to not allow a crossbow if your harvest numbers are not where you need them to be because traditional equipment isn't working. So did I clear that up at all for you, Dylan? Does that make sense where we're at?
Yes. Now, let me just say this. Pope and Young takes on a bad rap for being the archery police or the ones who hate crossbows. Listen, we recognize that crossbows are an ethical means of harvesting big game. However, we also recognize they're just a different weapon. So for the same reason that we don't accept rifle kills in Pope and Young, we don't accept crossbow kills in Pope and Young. We are not the police saying that if you use this equipment, you're a wretched human being and you're not an ethical bow hunter. That is not what we are saying. We are just saying that it is, in fact, a different weapon, and they have their own record book. Crossbows have their own record book, bolt and coral. And in fact, our measurers can measure for bolt and coral if they so choose. So we are not the record police sitting back saying all crossbows are bad. However, we also recognize that there is a time and place where they need to be highly restricted. I shouldn't say highly restricted. Put into a category of their own. Because in the same way that I can't walk up and shoot against Levi Morgan, if I was to walk up and whip out a Raven crossbow with a tripod and shoot against Levi Morgan, everybody in the world would say, well, you can't do that. It's not fair. It's a different weapon. Then why don't we treat them that way in hunting seasons is all the point I'm trying to make. Now, I'm also all for, listen, my dad's got bad shoulders. He can't bow hunt. I don't want to see him sit out. However, I also don't think, and my dad doesn't think, that he should have 3 months to run amok with a crossbow. He thinks that there should be a season for him to go out with a crossbow. Why? Because they are, in fact, a different weapon. It is not an archery. It's not a bow. It's not a vertical manual drawn bow. And so I just want to clear that up because we get such a bad rap for being the archery police. Well, there has to be somebody. There has to be somebody to look at these topics and to look at these subjects as they come up. Otherwise, who's going to do it? The non-hunting community?
The other interesting thing, Dylan, is it brings us back to our records program. We have data from 1961 on what the size of the animals being taken in these states are. If a new technology is added, we can look at that data and say, hey, hypothetically, let's see what the entries from Ohio did when they legalized crossbows. Did it affect what was taken in archery season? Did it shift their harvest from being spread across, archery and firearm season completely to the archery season? Did it reduce your overall size? Are you seeing a smaller class? And so this is why, people get hung up like, well, the buck just barely made book. Why should I enter it? A county that used to put out 140s left and right that now is putting out 130s. There's a reason for that. And that's what those records show. And, when we're having this debate on crossbows or a discussion on it, we've got to look at data. I mean, if we just sit and argue from, well, I don't feel it's fair, or I don't feel it's right, man, we're not going to get anywhere. If you can present logical arguments saying, hey, this is what the success rate does, over traditional archery gear or conventional archery gear, can your state's current whitetail season that's open for archery handle this? If the answer is yes, then clearly there's no problem with crossbows. Where we get into a problem is say, okay, well, traditionally you get say 45-day archery season. Well, if we're increasing our success rate by adding a new technology or a crossbow, and that state can no longer support 45, say they have to shorten that to 30, that's where you start stepping on another hunter's toes. Bow hunter doesn't care if you want to go out and hunt with a crossbow. But if you're right, if your entitlement to go out and shoot something with a crossbow costs him 15 days of his season to do it how he's always done, well, there's where our animosity comes from. And it's trying to negotiate that so everybody has an opportunity to go out and do what they love and take advantage of our, publicly owned wildlife resources that we're all fighting for. So I hope this, folks that are in this sees this isn't yes, Pope and Young in general, being for the promotion of archery, is going to be cautious around crossbows. It doesn't mean we hate the technology. It doesn't mean that there's no place. It just means realize there are ramifications for increasing success. And we want to be that voice that brings that to the conversation so that archery hunters don't lose the ability to go out with their conventional tackle and enjoy the historically long seasons and, relatively general bag limits that we had for so many years.
And again, like Justin alluded to, in his first kind of spiel there are counties in our country where you cannot kill enough whitetails. There are counties in our country that hand grenades and bazookas need to be legal to kill whitetails because we need to kill more. I am still of the opinion that even in those counties, there should be a dedicated season for crossbows. Now, can it be just as long, if not, almost as long as archery? Sure. But I do believe there still needs to be a separate season because it is separate equipment. And so that's kind of where I stand on it. And that's kind of where Pope and Young stands on it. It is a different weapon, should have its own season. It has its own record book. There are places that it serves a really good purpose. There are also places where it needs to be highly restricted, like in Arizona or in Idaho, where again, these tags, you can't get them. You can't hunt these places. And I promise you, well, I don't want to say that, but there are guys out there that have an idea in their mind about crossbows, but yet if you've been waiting and waiting and waiting for a tag, somebody draws the tag and goes in, with much higher odds to kill the animals because they're using a crossbow, you might learn pretty quick, where the standpoint is on this. And so, now what all goes into making a decision like this? I mean, that's a big decision to be made. So I also want to cover, this is not, like Justin said, this is not a whimsical, we don't like them, let's ban them. There is a lot that goes into a decision being made. And we're going to cover lighted sights here in a minute because Pope and Young recently allowed the acceptance of those. And a lot goes into those types of decisions. This is not just how do we feel about it? So what all goes into a decision like this?
Do you mean from a recording standpoint or from a state decision on whether or not to allow it?
Both. I mean, state, and then as far as Pope and Young is concerned,
within the state, structure, it basically varies by all different states. Some states, there's the ability that it could be at a ballot measure and it could be forced down the throats of the state managing authority. There's wildlife commissions that, might be political appointments that might have quite a bit of sway over, the inclusion or exclusion of one of these technologies. Hopefully the best case scenario is the managing wildlife agency would look at the data, look at the numbers and do an analytical comparison of, what can our state handle to reach our harvest objectives and whatnot, make that recommendation to whatever the regulating body is. And that's where those regulations would come from. Realistically, that isn't always the case, even though you've got some great people who've dedicated their lives to wildlife. In many cases on something like this, especially a polarizing topic, the wildlife agency may have, their say somewhat muffled by political or political either way, either be a ballot box or via, political appointed commissions, whatever it may be. And so, on that side, it's tough. In terms of Pope and Young and the Records Committee, and as Dylan said, lighted sights, at the end of the day, we're trying to collect a data set over time of archery. A major technological advance they'd look at. I mean, it'd be the same as an air bow. Does it shoot an arrow? Okay, well, that's about where the similarities end. The committee looks at that and says, no, that is not the original, definition of what we were trying to record. This isn't conventional archery. This isn't, this isn't the same thing. So from a recording standpoint, the Records Committee would say, no, we are not going to include crossbows with conventional archery tackle. And they made that decision a while ago. It's that comes to them. The same with, Boone and Crockett, they have a records committee that would say is a tactic outside fair chase. They make that decision, but again, the conversations, we're trying to get the states to understand we're not just doing this because we're trying to be elitist. We're saying like, hey, let's think about this. Let's make sure that it's the best for the wildlife. It's the best for the hunters. You'll hear, if you ever hear me talk, I always talk about the 78% of people that don't hunt but support it. I mean, bow hunting in general, you'll see how popular it is in modern media. I mean, Hunger Games and all that stuff. People love archery. People love archery hunting. They see it as an ethical pursuit. We need to make sure that we continue to present ourselves to those 78% that are currently supportive of our passion, and make sure that what they see is okay. Technology goes too far, something goes too far. They may say, you know what, maybe this hunting thing isn't okay. Maybe those guys aren't really the conservationists that they've told us that they are. And so you always got to keep that in mind too, as we're looking at this organizationally level and at the state level. Or, in the example of Idaho, they've got that advisory committee. Everybody needs to be thinking about the big picture, the future of wildlife, the future of hunting, and the North American model as we know it, and everything we do. And so all these conversations need to happen.
And that was the very conversation. Those were the very conversations we had surrounding the acceptance of lighted sights. So if you have not heard, Pope and Young now accepts lighted sights. And all of those conversations were had, and honestly, I heard feedback from both parties, from both sides, where guys think like, oh my gosh, we're just making stupid, whimsical decisions now. And guys that say about time, the data has been there all along. Why haven't, I heard from both sides of it, which is interesting to me because none of these decisions, and maybe it's because I get to see it from the backside, but none of these decisions are snap decisions overnight. None of these decisions are, well, let's just change this. Research goes into this, study goes into this, conversations with wildlife biologists and conservationists go into this. There's a lot that go into these types of decisions, and lighted sights was no different. Now, you might be one sitting back saying this should have happened decades ago, and you might be one sitting back saying, why is this happening? So why did we decide to accept lighted sights into the record books?
It was, like you said, Dylan, it went to a vote. It went to a vote of the membership. It was discussed at length at the committee. It was discussed at length at the board, and they looked at it. What does a lighted sight pin truthfully do for the bow hunter, right? If you look at, it's the same with a lighted reticle. If you look at how your eye reacts to an artificial light source at last shooting light, at least for me, and I'd argue it makes it more difficult to actually pick out your target, right? So adding a light source, and this was a lot of the debate. Well, we don't want people using these to, push shooting light to shoot later into the evening. When you look at the actual product, you're like, I'm not sure it actually does that. And so we talked to bow shop owners, we talked to shooters, we talked to everybody, and it was a very respectful conversation. It's like, hey, I see your point of view that if it was a technology that would make it, allow someone to hunt beyond the end of legal shooting time, if we were saying this will give them the ability to, violate a game law that the state has felt is important to put in, no, we would not have accepted it. But this was the debate that went on for years is, does this really do anything, to take away the deer's ability to detect you, to violate fair chase? And ultimately, between the records committee and the board, they voted that, we will send this to the membership for their consideration. We will ask the Pope and Young membership, which, you want to be involved in these decisions, follow up on membership and become a regular member or potentially a senior member. You can help make these decisions and be part of these conversations as we move forward. But, once they said, okay, we'll send it to the membership voted, and the overall answer was they did not feel that technology unfairly gave the hunter an advantage over the species being pursued. And as such, there was no reason to deny it, which is why we switched our position and allowed them into the records going forward.
So what that means for you as the hunter, if you killed a deer 7 years ago and the only reason you didn't enter it is because you killed it with a lighted sight, guess what? Now you can enter it. So find a measure in your area, get that deer entered. From a hunter's standpoint, let me give you a piece of advice. The only time I ever use a lighted sight is midday when it's bright as all get out. The sun is right above me, beating down on my sight. And I use that lighted sight because the sun is washing out my pins. And so that's really the only time I ever turn on a lighted sight. And I even do that very, very rarely because like Justin said, I used to be the kid that, right when last light came, I flipped my light on so that I could have a little bit more time. But then try to get in the dark and look past the light. You can't see anything behind it. So it does not help you at night. So if you're a new hunter listening to this, don't fall into that lie of like, well, I got to turn my light on when it gets dark because I can see later. Not true. Now, there are times where if I'm in the back of a blind, and it's blacked out in that blind and it's getting at dusk, not dark, but it's dusk, then yeah, it might help in that situation. But again, those are all types of things that go into that thought process of allowing something. Now, there's two types of people that I don't want to say despise because that's kind of harsh. There are two types of people that trigger me. And that's those that have no involvement in conservation groups, but then sit back and complain about what's going on in conservation groups. If you want to have a voice in things that are accepted or not accepted, join Pope and Young. Don't just sit back and say, well, they'd make all these decisions. Well, actually, as membership, you get to make the decision. So join your organizations to have that voice. But also the people that complain about rights being taken, but yet they're not a part of any conservation groups. And I know it sounds harsh, but I've oftentimes said, if your hunting seasons get taken from you and you're not a part of your conservation groups, you have no room to complain. So get involved in a conservation group. Get involved in the people that are fighting for your rights, not just Pope and Young. If you're a bow hunter and an elk hunter, join Pope and Young and Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. If you're a bow hunter and a deer hunter, join Pope and Young and the National Deer Association. If you're a duck hunter, join Ducks Unlimited. I've been over this several times. Get involved with the organizations that are protecting your rights. Get involved with the organizations that are helping to determine what is ethical for you to do and what is not ethical for you to do. Because if you want a voice in those times, you've got to be a member. That's my rant for the day, I guess, on membership and the people that want to have a voice but don't want to join to actually have a voice. So I'm gonna drop a hint here. I absolutely love predator hunting, thermal coyote hunting. Justin has tried. I'm going to use the word tried. He's making a strong effort to change my mind about the true conservation, what predator hunting does for conservation. So Justin's coming down in January to my casa, and we're going to do some duck hunting, do some upland bird hunting. But come January, our conservation spotlight episode is going to be on predator control, predator hunting, what it actually does for the conservation of big game. So tune into that. There might be some words thrown. I might call Justin a couple names. He might call me a couple names because, again, I just love coyote hunting. But it's going to be a good episode. It's going to be very informative. I promise you're going to learn something. So whether you're on one side or the other, whether you're a coyote hunter who loves it and you think you're saving all the fawns, or whether you think you can't really truly make a difference, I promise you're going to learn something. It's going to be a good episode. So come back January for our conservation spotlight episode. Hear everything that Pope and Young's got going on. We'll do a recap of the December event, and then we're going to talk predator control. Going to be a fun episode. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Again, this is your best place every month to come and get your news on Pope and Young, what's new in the world of Pope and Young, what's going on, new world records broken, which are always fun to hear about. So guys, subscribe to the Typical Sportsman podcast. Once a month, we'll be coming at you with a conservation spotlight with the guys from Pope and Young to cover everything in the world of conservation. Thank you so much for listening. Y'all have a fantastic week.